quite a few principals I've seen in the past that say, I just want one person. And nobody is there with the subject matter expertise to explain why that is not the way it goes.
Welcome to More Than the Gun. I'm your host, Harry Arruda. Join me as we dive into the multifaceted world of risk mitigation, public safety, and everything in between. Welcome back to More Than a Gun podcast, where we dive into the multifaceted world of executive protection, risk mitigation, and public safety. Today's a very special episode for me. We have our first guest of the podcast, and I couldn't think of a more appropriate person to have than industry thought leader Brian Jantzen. As a 25-year veteran in the EP arena, Brian's experience and insight have significantly shaped our industry. Brian has been a key player in managing executive protection programs around the globe, ensuring both productivity and safety are maximized for our high-profile clients. Brian's perspective on what success looks like in executive protection and risk mitigation aligns closely with my own views, making him an ideal first guest. I'm excited to dive into his experiences and insights, and I know you'll find his thoughts enlightening and as valuable as I do. Brian, thank you for joining us today.
Hey, Harry. This is awesome. Thank you very much. I'm honored to be the very first guest on your new podcast, and thank you very much for the great introduction as well. I appreciate it.
I appreciate you doing this. Like I say, there is no one better to have on our first episode. And probably the best way to start is if you could tell us a little bit about your background, how where you started, how you got into the industry, and where you're at now.
Yeah, absolutely. So not necessarily relevant, but definitely an important part of my life was joining the Marine Corps and being both enlisted and an officer in the Marine Corps. Tell people I like boot camp so much I went twice, and so I learned a lot from that time in the military, and then I had the opportunity to transition out of the military and basically wound up in the right place at the right time, a little place called Microsoft. And they had just started their first EP program, hired their first EP manager and their first security operations program and manager. And I was on the contract side and was part of my role to help them both build their programs. So from scratch. So got to see a couple of pretty large programs get built and be a part of those, and then be doing executive protection internationally for many, many years, and doing that for a number of different clients, ultra high net worth folks, and then so I've had the opportunity to start, fix, and run several different programs. Both as an internal employee and on the service provider side. So I've been very fortunate to have the opportunity to be both on the buyer of services side and the seller of services side, and now my hope is to be able to give some of that back to both EP programs and or EP service providers to help them improve, and then overall help improve the EP industry in total. So I had the opportunity to work with Microsoft and AS Solution, and also at Facebook, and then with Allied Universal, and now I'm out on my own as independent consultant, enjoying some great opportunities to work with some great folks. So that's what I get to do now is pretty much write and think and help others.
Excellent. I was just thinking just now, I actually remember the first time you and I met, and it was at a hotel in San Francisco. I think it was a Fairmont Hotel. And you had a personality that was not typical of EP agents. You were extremely friendly, warm, bubbly. Everybody else was very straight-laced, very straight-faced, and here you go, here's the principal, we're passing him off. And I thought, okay, this guy's different. I kind of like this guy. There's no ego, no attitude. So, I remember that was the first time we had met. So, and that's, I want to think that's about 20 plus years ago.
That's a long time ago.
Yeah.
Yeah. It definitely could be easily 20 years ago. Yeah.
So with the time that's passed that you've had in the industry, how do you see executive protection has evolved over the years from when you first started to where it is now?
Yeah. Well, there's been a big difference on the demand, I would say, really, is the first difference, in that before, a corporation or an individual would be looking at, okay, well, how do we build a corporate security program? How do we build a family office? And then eventually they get to, well, we probably should think about executive protection. It's really switched to, I've had personally instances where executive protection is first, and then the executive protection can precede the development of a corporate security program overall. So it's really moved up in its in the demand, and there's been a proliferation of programs, I would say, as well. So the demand for executive protection agents has gone up. The demand for how executive protection is customized and talked about has changed quite a bit. And so it's really growing up into a more formalized, more mature industry, which is exciting to see. Whereas before there were probably more people that thought of it as a retirement job, and now that's a much smaller portion of how people think about it, and now it's really a career that people are pursuing and are excited about, and so it's really starting to mature in those ways.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think we've seen a lot of change to where the agents of today are totally different than the agents of 15 years ago, let's say. And so there's a younger group that's coming in. They may have, at the most, they may have some military experience, but the days of this being a retirement job after 20, 25 years with the police department or State Department, or have you, I think those days are not done, but we're definitely seeing less and less. And I think in many ways, that's good, because I think folks are coming in at a younger age where they're a little bit more moldable. And I think that they have a little more of the customer service side versus the very straight-laced law enforcement, show the badge, this is the penal code, and that's it. And so when it's 2:00 in the morning and the principal needs something from the store that you would probably buy for your kids or your wife, your spouse, and you go to get it, I think it's a little bit easier with the younger generation of agents coming in, because they understand the customer service side, whereas typically the law enforcement folks would say, I'm not doing that. Leave that for the estate manager, leave that for the staff. So there definitely is a change. With all that change, do you think the development of EP teams have become more complex as a result?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the requirements of EP teams have gotten much higher. So you're looking at, as I think, I've talked with you obviously before, and with other folks, is the whole concept of keeping people safe, satisfied, and productive, right? So it's a lot more than just the safety and security piece. And so, that's the requirements are basically now that you have to have these concierge skills, these interpersonal skills, along with the tactical, technical, martial skills of days before, because that still is, safety and security still is the number one role. But as I'm prone to say, we're not going to save your life every day, but we will help you optimize your time, energy, and focus. And that's where the more complexity comes in, is being able to think about more than just the tactical approach, and think a few steps ahead, as in playing chess versus playing checkers. So yeah, I think it's become more complex, and now we need to take it to the next level, so that now we can look at not just technical, tactical skills, but cognitive skills and personality skills, and really delve into also things like risk judgment and decision making, right? So are you really seeing what the real risks are? What are your biases that are causing you to think about it in a certain way or not? And how do you improve your risk judgment? How do you improve your ability to make the best possible decision? That's the kind of complexity that we're now going to move into as well. But other complexities around starting, fixing, and running programs, not just doing protection, but how do you start a program at a Fortune 500 company, right? Or how do you, as a service provider, support a program at a Fortune 500 company? These are complex issues that go to HR, strategies, communicating to the board, getting approval from the board and the principals, working within the whole ecosystem of the corporation, and all of these activities. So maybe a long-winded answer to your question, but I there's a lot to it.
There's definitely more people involved in the conversation, especially when there's the initial meeting. It's not just the security director or the CSO saying, "Hey, I need help. I'm by myself, and I need a detail for an event or something like that." I think it's now we are starting to see more folks from legal, an executive assistant, HR, finance is involved, and I think it comes down to the provider needs to be able to communicate the value adds, and that it's not just it's not just an expense that's just like janitorial and just like ordering paper. You have to sell it in a way, and you have to show there's value to it. So I definitely think it's important. I also think that today's agent needs to understand a variety of things, from not just the principal has a peanut allergy, to understand who's also going to be at the hotel that they're staying at the same time. Is it a competing executive that they don't get along with, or is there other risks associated with being at that hotel? Things like that. I also think intelligence plays a key role in today's agent. They need to understand that information. So it's for me, and what I'm seeing, it's definitely changed. It's definitely changed over the years.
Well, and I'd like to throw in too, Harry, because I think it's important, especially now, and it's something I've been doing some thinking around, is the differences between federal protection and private sector protection. Huge differences, right? And so when people shouldn't necessarily make the assumption that federal protection personnel know how to deliver a private protection program. It's very different. It's like soccer versus rugby, right? I mean,
Right.
you're both matriculating a ball down the field to get it in a goal. But you can see that they're very different games. And I think that's important to understand as well, in that you can't, well, one shouldn't just assume that because someone was in the Secret Service, that they can automatically start, fix, or run a program in the private sector. Very different context.
I totally agree. And to drill it down even more, I also think that when it comes down to private sector protection, I think we've talked about this in the past, there's very different styles. And so there is an East Coast style, there's a West Coast Silicon Valley style, there's a West Coast LA style, there's a Texas style. So it's something that has to be really thought out in great detail. And that also comes down to when they select agents, to when they select agents for some of these details. They have to be the right cultural fit. I know we've talked about that, but we have seen it become a disaster when you are getting an East Coast principal, a Wall Street type, a Manhattan business person, and they're getting an agent that happened to work for a .com company. He's used to jeans, Chuck Taylors, and maybe a Tommy Bahama shirt. And now he's going into this where he thinks business professional is just putting on a sport coat. It's too different. And the style, the language, even in some ways, the way the dialogue is handled and the interaction with principals, it's very different. So I think there's got to be a lot of thought put into running programs, right down to how you assign agents. So
Absolutely.
yeah. So you recently posted an article on LinkedIn called Maximizing Productivity and Safety with Executive Protection, which we'll link in the show notes. In that article, you mentioned safety, satisfaction, and productivity as the core objective for the EP program. Can you elaborate a little bit more on how you think these objectives are prioritized and achieved?
Yeah. So as I started to discuss the safety piece, and I include safety and security, just to make it more like it's a simpler way to explain it to people, to try to get them to understand, right? So where did those three things come from? They came from trying to explain to a principal's exec admin as to what is it that we do, right? What is it that an EP program does? And I had to explain it to the exec admin so that she could explain it to the principal. That's the way it worked in that place, right? And as we touched on just before this, every principal is unique and different from the next. So you have to approach it just like a London tailor, right? It's a suit that you've got to make fit this person. Safety is the best practices in close protection, right? That's the technical aspects of doing protection. How you position yourself, risk identification, risk assessment, threat management, those types of advanced work, as we talk about in the technical aspect of things, defensive tactics, security driving, firearms if you have them, use of force, all of these things. That's the safe piece. The satisfied piece is really where you need to try to take those risk mitigation activities and the technical skills and combine them with the cultural and individual preferences of the principal and the organization that you're working in. So you have to customize it. And that's where you can try to get them satisfied that, you're doing things that they're comfortable with. You have to understand their risk tolerance level, right? Some folks may have a higher risk tolerance than others. Some folks may be concerned more about their security than others. So you have to understand all of that. And then you you customize those risk mitigation activities with that all in mind to try to keep them satisfied. Now, productivity support, as I mentioned, not going to save your life every day, but can help you optimize your time, energy, and focus. That's the real return on investment, because that's where a well-conceived and well-implemented EP program can allow or enable, if you will, an executive to not be distracted and not be harmed, and and those are two really important things that help them stay focused on what it is they want to do or they need to do for their organization.
And I think a key service that is often overlooked, but is a good entry point into executive protection, is secured transportation. And I think that provides a good, subtle entry into security without having an overbearing EP agent with somebody for the very first time who's never had security. And especially in places like New York, San Francisco, LA, the traffic is horrendous. Now even Austin, let's say. The traffic's horrendous. And so if it's normally going to take you 15 minutes to get somewhere and it's now 45 minutes to an hour, that's a significant loss of time when you put a dollar amount on that for an executive. And so having secure transportation, I think, is a great entry point. It's a great value add, and it's a good way to kick things off. And you can always scale up from there. We've tried it. It works. It is oftentimes the very first service offering that we will suggest when we hear that a principal has never had security before, or absolutely has never wanted security or had a bad experience. Let's just start with that. And I think that's a good entry point. So I definitely agree with you on the safety and the productivity.
Yeah, and getting people from point A to point B in the most efficient manner, right? That's also somewhat of a risk mitigation activity.
Right.
Because then, you're reducing the exposure of that individual to a number of different potential issues, from road traffic accidents to unwanted approaches to potentially worse.
Right. So like the changes we see in the role of the EP agents, we've also seen, I think you would agree, a significant change in training programs. 25 years ago, there was 3 main organizations. And today it seems like a lot of independent folks are putting on training programs. And it's either just a specific block of training or it's anywhere from a 2 to 3 day program. What's your thoughts on the training opportunities that are currently out there today? And how different were they from the ones that you've had in the past?
Well, there are still the tried and true, I think, that run the important basics of executive protection, and those folks are making adjustments, I think, somewhat. Although I think more adjustments can be made to your classic styles, and I think, and I haven't been through all of them. I've been through a couple of the main ones. I've been through some additional high threat training that's really not that appropriate for folks in the private sector, but it's a good expansion of your training. I think we have to be careful of people who are primarily training tactical skills. So that's an issue, that it's not all about use of force and using guns, right? So there's got to be. I like to break it down into 3 skill sets that we need to try to train in EP agents: the technical skills, the cognitive skills, and the personality skills. I think my challenge to us in the industry is to navigate away a little bit from the hard skills versus soft skills. I don't think that's specific enough. I think it's kind of a little bit old style, old school. So my suggestion is that we all look at, okay, well, how do we train technical skills, cognitive skills, and personality skills? Because a lot of your technical skills are typically easier to train than cognitive skills and personality skills. And you and I both have seen it many times that the reason EP agents fail is because of their personality skills or lack thereof, right? They have great technical skills. They may even have superior cognitive skills, but their personality skills are terrible. And then that will trump all the rest of them, and they will no longer be able to apply their technical or cognitive skills in an area where their personality skills don't fit right.
Right.
So staying away from just the technical skills is, I think, important when people are coming into the industry. Look for something that has a broader breadth of teaching that does all three of those that I've mentioned.
Yeah. With embedded programs, we're now seeing training standards being developed and emphasized more on regular agent training. And besides the basic training that you get with advanced work, arrivals, departures, motorcades, things like that, kind of the older school training, what other training do you think today's agent should have to elevate their skill set and to be able to be a more total agent for today's times?
Yeah, and that's a great question. When I was coming up, we really didn't focus much on, hey, let's go do an RTBA of X, the residence, or a second home, or a third home, or a fourth home, and so I think one place where we could add more training is in risk threat vulnerability assessments for EP agents. I think that's an important piece that would be great to train folks on, and that then also leads to these concepts of risk judgment and decision making. So how do we train people on risk judgment and decision making to help them improve both of those areas? So creative problem solving, right? How do we train people to do that? Stress management, I think, is a key important piece. How do you make sure that you can stay calm and have that calm sense of urgency as you go through your day and give other people confidence that you've got things under control, right? So those kind of things. And then I'm also now this is for me, it's a little bit of a do as I say, not as I do. But I think it's super important for EP agents to go ahead and get their CPP, right? But I also think it's super important that some EP agents that are motivated to do it is to get their CTM from ATAP, right? I think that would be a phenomenal combination, right? To have all of these things that I just talked about, being able to be trained into EP agents that already have the technical skills and already know how to do advanced work, which is a super important art and science all in itself.
Sure. Yeah. I think getting back to your comment about stress, I think the focus has always been on stressful situations around the gun. And I think for me, the more stressful situations have been an EA texting, the flight's been delayed, the principal wants to now go to this restaurant on the opposite end of town from where the FBO is. And oh, by the way, can you find a FedEx place to pick up a copy that I just sent? And by the way, you got 20 minutes to do all of that. So that's the kind of stress that I would love to see more training on versus, anything relating to the gun or anything relating to EVOC and driving and things like that. I think you're more likely to get that type of stress more often than you are anything with the gun, even though, crime has definitely been up and violence has definitely increased. But I think the day-to-day stress that needs a little bit more focus on is those, let's say, admin related things. That's what stresses me out.
I agree. And, we don't have enough time here, but if we, Stoic philosophy is something that I've really it's really helped me. And so I highly recommend it to everybody I talk to when it comes to stress management.
Excellent. With that, the role of technology in EP has greatly increased over the years as well. And I think it's safe to say that we've gone well past the days of just having a flip phone and an AOL account. What role do you think technology now plays in modern EP programs, especially in terms of enhancing security measures and operational efficiencies with details?
Yeah, well, I'm a big fan these days of thinking about adding science, technology, and structure into the executive protection industry. I think that can be super helpful in a few different ways. But I would say some of your technology that's really impacting executive protection is around protective intelligence and travel risk assessment. So you've got technologies now that are platforms that are constantly and very intelligently looking for issues, threats, risks that will affect your principal. It's always on, right? And their folks are adding in AI, right, to help do these processes and make sure that programs are better informed through technology platforms. So that's a key piece. I think that there is, and that goes for both the internal program side and the service provider side. Now, what I think is important for the service provider side is the ability to scale to continue to provide quality engagement and quality control with clients. Now, I think there are some opportunities in the CRM space, in the service platform space, that a technology platform can be can help add more capability and consistency with a larger number of clients, right? So clients expect to have quality engagement with their service provider, and they expect that their service provider is going to have high levels of quality control. So there are those platforms, and then I think what we're missing is not necessarily a technology platform, but it's definitely a structure, and that is a quality management system, right? So what is the quality management system at this program or from this service provider? How do they provide quality assurance? How do they provide quality control? What do they do as a process that's formalized that helps establish those things? So, and then on the more tactical side, and something that I haven't necessarily experienced myself, but I know the number of different applications that can be used by an EP agent to make their coverage and their support better it's through the roof, right? Mapping and photos and reports and different things like that can be applied through a device. Those are kind of the big pieces that I see from the technology aspect.
Yeah. So let's segue a little bit into the topic of privacy in EP, because that's a big area that I think is oftentimes overlooked. Agents will have an NDA in place, and and given that talk to be scared into just not talking at all. But maintaining reputation and privacy, I think is I think it's crucial for high-profile individuals. You have to have that level of confidentiality and privacy. How do EP programs tailor security measures to respect that privacy and align with the personal preferences of the principal?
Yeah, I think the first thing that needs to happen is assessments, right? So first of all, I mean, and you're not just assessing risk and vulnerabilities and threats. You're assessing their culture. You're assessing their preferences. Because if you don't know them, then you have no idea how to avoid compromising them.
Right.
Right. Obviously, discretion is super important. So the ability to build an appropriate relationship with a principal and the people around them. So I think understanding the cultural requirements and the individual preferences, and then making sure that there is coaching going on with the individual agents so that they understand clearly what's happening and what the expectations are from a cultural and individual perspective standpoint. Awareness is the number one thing, right? And then being able to hold people accountable, coach them on what the issues are, and then hold them accountable, and make changes when you need to.
Right.
I think that I'm not sure if I fully answered your question, but I think that those are the things that popped into my head.
Yeah. I think sometimes the problems lie in there may be an assessment done, and that isn't oftentimes shared with the agents, and so the agents are left out in the cold and left to figure it for themselves. And I think the sharing of potentially a redacted report with the agents to set them up for success and to try to limit any pitfalls in engaging with the client or doing anything that could compromise the detail, I think is key. And I think sometimes that component is missed. So I definitely agree with you.
Yeah, and this goes back to basically where I should have started. All of this discussion is, we want to be that trusted advisor. So how do you build trust? Well, in my opinion, the simple answer is by building consistency and transparency over time. Now that goes for not only the principal, but the people around the principal and the teammates, right? It's up to the leader of that EP program to develop consistency and transparency for all as most appropriate,
right,
within disclosure and discretion limits. So yeah, making sure that everybody's on the same page, to be cliche.
Right. So I want to talk a little bit about improving EP programs. Oftentimes an established EP program, whether it's just a simple RST program or an actual full-scale EP detail, will become stagnant over time, especially when there's periods of time where there's been no significant issues towards the principal. It's just, clock in, clock out, the daily grind. What are some improvements that can be established in EP program to improve the existing program that can be done on a scalable level so that behind the scenes things are constantly improving? They're not, and at the same time not impacting the client, but you're showing that value, you're pivoting a little bit to make adjustments, and it doesn't remain stagnant.
Yeah. Again, I'll go back to how I like three things. But I'll go to three things. Improving from here is science, technology, and structures. Now, the most important piece, I think, that we can actually affect right away is structure. And that goes to a quality management system process, a formalized process where we identify all of the capabilities and expectations of a program, and we audit those on a regular basis. Are we doing them? How are they are we meeting the metrics or the expectations, the service level agreement? And this is not just for service providers. This is for internal programs to audit themselves on a regular basis and provide at least a quarterly report of where they are and what they're doing and what comes next, right? So a quality management system also, in a formalized way, has a non-conformance process. So that means auditing yourself and saying, are there any non-conformances? Identify them, and then identify the corrective actions that are required to bring it back into conformance. And then track those corrective actions, right? So a structure of quality management can help programs improve fairly quickly, and keep them on track. Because now I have to, as an EP leader, I have to deliver a report every quarter. And what I say to on internal EP teams, they should be driving that, right? But if a service provider comes with that, all the better, right? And for the service provider to come with their own quality management system, that helps keep them more proactive and less of, the principal or the internal team finding a problem and telling the service provider about it. It should be the other way around. Service provider audits themselves, identifies the non-conformance, puts in the corrective action, fixes it, and lets everybody know that it's been fixed on a quarterly basis. And so for either an internal team or a service provider, they should be delivering a quarterly business review that covers all of the key performance indicators of that program. And if they don't deliver it in an actual meeting, they should email it to somebody who needs to see it. So that to me is a structure that's super important, that could add a lot of value and help a lot of programs improve pretty quickly.
Yeah, I agree. And I think we're starting to see that over the last couple of years more with the smaller providers, the smaller to mid-size, because they value the relationship with the client. They want to continue it. And we're seeing less of it coming from what I call the big box providers. There's a little more personalized attention, not a little more, a lot more personalized attention with the small to mid-sized companies, and they understand what goes into it. So I think having quarterly meetings, getting ahead of any problems or getting ahead of anything is key. I also think that even if it's not getting ahead of something, if it's an enhancement or a value add, it's still worth bringing up in the quarterly meetings to show that you're regularly thinking about them and you're trying to improve things. So I agree. The last thing I ever wanted was the principal coming to me saying, Harry, this happened. And then I'm just standing there going, I didn't know about this, and I'll take care of it. And, then I have to go figure it out. So I definitely agree with you.
Yeah.
So we talked a little bit about the complexities facing EP teams. What are some of the common operational challenges you see EP teams face today? And how can they prepare to handle these challenges effectively? I think we kind of touched on it with the quarterly reviews, but do you see consistently these days more common problems that are happening that are just not getting addressed?
Yes. The first thing that pops into my head is understaffing, right? It starts with quite a few principles I've seen in the past that say, I just want one person. And nobody is there with the subject matter expertise to explain why that is not the way it goes or it should go, right? So then you get people who are super motivated because it's a really great opportunity, right? And in some cases with our military folks, the last time they were doing protection, they could have been killed every day. Now they get the chance to do protection and they're not in a combat zone. And so they're like, oh, hey, no problem. They're going to make me work. But hey, I'm not getting shot at, right? And I'm getting paid well. So I think one of our biggest issues is getting organizations and principals to understand the importance of proper staffing. And that's going to take all of us figuring out how we overcome their hesitation, how we overcome their resistance to, well, you don't want one person, you want one position. Because, by the way, CEO, you work 80 hours a week. Let's just do some simple math. You need somebody that's going to be available to you 80 hours a week while you're working and away from your home. But they also have work to do before they start on you and after they start their day with you. So now you're looking at potentially close to 100 hours a week. And people are expecting individuals to do all of that. But then they say, well, when he's not with me or she's not with me, then they're just relaxing. No, they're not. There has to be an awareness as to how we address this staffing issue and get programs staffed appropriately.
Yeah, I think everybody has been ingrained not to talk to the principals, and everyone from the account manager, the detail leader, the agent, don't talk to the principal. And I think there is a time in the relationship where certain times where you have to have that conversation. And I think that the key thing is you also have to educate the client in many ways. They need to understand, because they just think, well, I work 80 hours. Yes, you do. And then you go to bed. But there's a lot of pre-work and there's a lot of post-work. There's anything from fueling the car and vacuuming the car all the way to advanced work, to getting to the next city, perhaps. And so it's not one person. And so I think what you said was key. It's one position maybe, but there's multiple people in that one position. And I think just typically folks have been ingrained, we don't talk to the client. This is what they want, just do it. And I think what happens is 6 months down the road, when that agent is burnt out or there's been a problem, an accident, somebody doesn't get picked up on time, it all stems from that. And that's, I just never wanted to come to that. So I think having a conversation, you can have it. There's some unreasonable people out there, but I think sometimes you can still just say, if I can just get a quick moment of your time. And you can also work through an EA, an estate manager, or personal assistant to explain them, because they are the trusted advisor to that person. And they are typically the conduit between you and the principal. So I definitely agree. They have to have, there has to be more dialogue and discussion, particularly about staffing. We're already short-staffed in the industry it is with qualified folks. So now's no better time to do it.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about executive protection and business continuity. I know this is something that was you mentioned in your article. Do you think there's a connection between the two? And then do you think that the EP programs can contribute to business continuity for the ultra high net wealth community?
Yeah, I think the discussion that I have there is making sure that they're not interrupted, disrupted, thrown off of their focus and what they're trying to accomplish. So that goes to understanding the situational contexts, an EP agent understanding what's happening around the principal, what the principal is trying to accomplish, and making sure that that they do everything to not allow the principal to be knocked off their course, right? So allowing them to continue on with their business. So in a more, verbatim way, the business continuity, not getting distracted, not getting interrupted, and making sure that everything happens as expected. So the logistical coordination from point A to point B to point C all happens as expected. And so therefore the program and the EP agents are helping the executive do the business that they're trying to do, or live the life that they're trying to live if it's on the private side of things.
Yeah. In the article, one of the things that really stuck out to me was the parallel you drew between the EP advisor and fiduciaries in the financial context. It just stuck out to me quite a bit. I thought that was fantastic. Oh. How does the comparison reflect the role and the responsibilities for an EP advisor?
Yeah, I think, well, see, a fiduciary is it has to take into account the best interests of the client, right? So in the case of some, say, actively managed accounts with a fiduciary, the fiduciary does better when the client does better, right? So it's incumbent upon the fiduciary to look out for the best interests of the client, to reduce risk and provide them with peace of mind. Right. And so that's exactly what an EP advisor does, or an EP agent or an EP program, is to be looking out for the best interests of the client that they're supporting, mitigate risks, and give them peace of mind to help them accomplish the goals that they want to accomplish. The financial side, it's the same thing, help you accomplish your financial goals that you want to accomplish. But it's in the security and risk mitigation of physical security issues on the EP advisor side. So it really, when I started thinking about it, it really started to make sense that, well, how can we help principals and organizations better understand? I mean, that's been my whole career, is to try to help principals and organizations better understand what it is, what are the features, benefits, and value add of executive protection. And so trying to draw it into maybe something that they're more familiar with, like a financial fiduciary, and drawing the comparisons and the parallels might help them better understand why they need to staff their program properly.
Yeah. Yeah, I totally agree. I think that's part of the dialogue, again, that you have to have. It just makes things more successful in the end, I believe. Historically, EP services has been looked at as a cost center rather than a value add. And I think that's slowly starting to change. You have to have security. It's one of those things that it's just very costly. Over the years, many in the industry, such as yourself, have actively promoted the idea that if you approach executive protection with a partnership mindset rather than solely just a service, it can actually be a value add. Can you talk a little bit more about that kind of partnership mindset versus just principal service provider or EP agent principal? Can you expand a little bit more on that?
Well, I think, again, it goes back to trust, right? The first thing you need to try to develop is trust. And a lot of times that takes a lot longer than people think. But there are some specific things that can also be done, some equations that we talked about to get that trust to the next level. For a program, I submit that trust is consistency and transparency over time. For an individual, there's a really great book called The Trusted Advisor by David Maister and a few others. I can't remember.
I have it here. I have it on my shelf.
Yeah, and the equation, the trust equation in there is, I think, more personal. So for an actual agent themselves, right? Credibility, reliability, and intimacy. You add those all together, and then you divide it by self-orientation. So, credibility and reliability. I think those are pretty straightforward to figure out. Intimacy. It's a little bit of a strange word for us in the EP world, but what that really means is developing appropriate relationships with people, and being able to do that. But the more self-oriented someone is, the less trust they will develop, because really being able to understand how to build trust is super important. And I don't think I've answered your question yet. Can you tell me again what it was?
So if you could dive a little deeper in the concept of a partnership mindset versus just a service provider principal mindset or customer provider relationship. I believe that you have to have a level of customer service, but you also have to, they are the client, but you also have to come in with a partnership mindset. So you want to be part of the solution. I have somebody that I work closely with, and he is constantly either ending the conversation with or starting the conversation with, how can I be part of the solution? And I think that's something that's never really asked. It's, I need this, go do this. Or I have a problem, okay, I'll just take care of it. So how can that partnership mindset be developed more in what we do?
Gotcha. So when I think about this partnership mindset, now I'm thinking about not the principals, but I'm thinking about the stakeholders, the people responsible on the internal side for delivering executive protection. And then your service providers. That partnership is super important. And what we really have to do is both sides have a responsibility here. The internal stakeholder side has a responsibility to be a leader of their vendor partners. And I also like to call them specialist partners, right? So the internal folks that are responsible to deliver the EP program are responsible to lead the whole team, including the vendors. The leadership approach is super important. The coaching approach. I'm not saying don't hold people accountable, but as a leader, I need to first make sure that people understand what is expected. And as a leader, I need to start to develop some consistency and transparency for all the people that are supporting this program. And if I'm moving the target, or if I'm not sharing the right type or amount of information, then I'm not leading appropriately. So coming to the table with a partnership mindset that says, it's my responsibility to lead this program, and I'm going to make sure everybody understands what my strategies are, what my vision is, what the expectations of the organization are, and then I'm going to regularly check in with everybody and make sure they understand that. Now, on the service provider side, their responsibility is to bring that engagement and to bring their subject matter expertise, and to bring the quality control, and to bring innovation, right? And to me, innovation comes in three primary ways. One is procedural. That's bring some new ideas on how this can be done, specifically for my principal with their risk level in our organization, right? The next one is cultural innovation. How do we talk about it? Do you bring in better, more effective ways of explaining the features, benefits, and value add? to our organization, to our principle. And then technological innovation. What technologies do you have that you can bring to help us improve our ability to keep our principals safe, satisfied, and productive? Right? So that's the kind of partnership that I'd really like to see. And if I was ever to go back into a key stakeholder decision maker role on an internal organization, that would be my approach, right? Is to, hey, it's my responsibility. I'm going to make sure everybody understands what's expected of them, and then we're going to review it over and over again.
Yeah, and I think one key thing to point out is when it comes to the leadership part is I think oftentimes we promote based on the length of time somebody has been there, and I don't think that's the best approach. I think I've never heard of a program which invests in a leadership role other than saying, okay, you've been here for 2 years, the principal likes you, you haven't called off sick and, caused us any problems. But I think we need to look at, can that person be a leader, and what can we do to support them in providing maybe some guidance and some training, a mentor, something. And so the leadership thing, topic is very key. I think it's something we as an industry need to look at a lot more. For executives go ahead.
I want to jump in just a little bit more on that one, but coaching, a coaching approach, right? So that we teach our leaders, team leaders, et cetera, on how they can better coach their teammates and vendors. But I think also what we have not been very good at in our industry is performance evaluation and doing it effectively, right? Because in the internal programs at Fortune 500 companies, they'll use their process for HR and performance evaluations that don't necessarily have relevant information in them. So we really need to kind of, as an EP industry, bring forward a more effective performance evaluation process that we can use with our teammates.
Sure. I think oftentimes the only feedback anybody gets is when they've done something wrong. And that just tells you what not to do, but you need to know what to do or how you're doing, how well you're doing. So I definitely think that evaluation process is key, and it is often overlooked as well. So
yeah.
Switching gears a little bit, for executives facing international travel and engagements, what are some key strategies that EP agents need to employ to mitigate risk from geopolitical instability and other global threats, especially with everything that's going on in the world today?
Again, I would go back to awareness and preparation, right? And planning. Because in some cases, we're going to kind of be stuck in a reactive mode if something happens, right? We don't have those federal protection resources. So I would say the best travel risk assessment that's most informative to what you need it to be is number one, because that starts your awareness of what could go wrong. What are the potential problems here? And then when you get on the ground to do your advance work, you're preparing those reactive activities if any of those things kick off, right? And so awareness and planning, I think it's pretty basic from that standpoint, and being able to be creative in solving problems and getting yourself out of trouble.
Right.
But that also takes an understanding of ground truth It takes your preparation of local resources, and that you came in and you built relationships instead of we're hammering on people and not building relationships. So all of that stuff plays a role.
Yeah, it does. It does. I've always been about relationships because I didn't come from a law enforcement background. I started from scratch, and I had to. I came in at a time where everybody was either military or law enforcement, and I was this inexperienced kid, basically, is what they were calling me, because I was working around folks that had retired after 20 years or 25 years of law enforcement. And one thing I learned is those folks didn't build relationships. They had that kind of cop mentality. I have the badge, you got to do this. And I didn't have that. So I had to find other ways. So, I posted a blog article a while back, but I have still keep in contact with a housekeeper in Rome at a hotel because they helped me achieve something a principal wanted. And I have on occasion sent a Christmas gift now and then just to stay in touch, because I just never know when I'm coming back there and when I may need something. And so that relationship building, I think, is definitely key to make things successful. So I definitely agree with you on that. Considering the evolving nature with the security threats today, and kind of expanding a little bit more on this, what do you foresee as the future trends or advancements in executive protection for our industry? Where do you see things going? Obviously, AI is significant. There's a lot of technology with GSX coming up in a short time. There's going to be a lot of technology out there probably around AI, but is there anything else besides that you're seeing that we should look out for?
Yeah, if I think about science, technology, and structure, on the science side, what I'm seeing is some very interesting stuff around behavioral assessment. So being able to understand how a person makes decisions, how they think, what motivates them, what their mental state is at this current time, and their personality, right? So being able to add that, and that's science based, right? So that's part of the science part of the triumvirate, if you will. But I think having being able to better assess and be more aware of an individual's behavioral assessment will help us match agents better to clients and programs, and then it will help us with managing the wellness of those agents as time goes on. So that's something that I think that I feel very strongly about, actually, is that I think all EP agents should go through the behavioral assessment process, and then have that well-being monitored over time to see how they're doing. So that's one thing. I think that obviously on the technology side, we've got all kinds of AI involvement in doing travel risk assessment. We've got AI involved in doing POI and GOI assessment, monitoring, and research and investigation. Those platforms, I think, are super important, and people need to start adopting those things, I think, more often than not. But those are kind of some of the things I think are important from a science and technology standpoint.
Excellent. So I wanted to wrap this up by doing something a little different. It's more along the lines of a quick rapid fire 5 questions to get to know Brian Jantzen a little bit better. So if you'd have dinner with any historical figure, who would it be and why?
Abraham Lincoln. He went through some amazing stuff, and just is a super interesting guy.
Excellent. What's the one place you've traveled to for work, or the one detail that you've worked on that's been your most memorable? you said, all right, I've made it. And I know you've been to some pretty big places.
Patna, India.
Excellent. And why?
Yeah, Patna, India. Most difficult detail in my professional career. Helicopter organizing helicopters in rural India, and going to two different, rural villages that don't have any running water or nothing. They have nothing, right? That was and India in general, because besides Patna, I've done quite a few other locations in India, and India is definitely my number one.
I was in Delhi for what was supposed to be 3 days that turned out to be 2.5 weeks. There was a delay from day 2 to day 3, and the principal ended up going back home, and they just told me to stay there. And I ended up taking a 12-hour train ride and going to some remote parts in an area called Varanasi. And it was, I really was happy not to have to work in that area, because it was an experience just from a civilian side or just from a tourist side to get around there. And so I can definitely relate to what you probably have gone through. So you mentioned the Stoic philosophy. So I think this is probably, these next couple of questions are along those lines and appropriate. How do you define success personally?
Oh gosh, personally. Well, some of the things I'm most proud of are people that I have helped in the past and mentored and coached, and to see them be successful. Another thing that's important to me is that I added value at some point in something that is still an ongoing concern. That makes being an integrator, actually taking visions and bringing them to life. Those are things that get me going.
And what's the most important lesson you've learned from failure?
Oh, well, if I go back to one of my biggest failures in my life was when I quit football in 7th grade. It was because I quit. Oh, that changed my life. And from then on, it was, and I quit football in 7th grade because I was scared I was going to get hurt. So from then on, it was, if I'm scared of it, I got to do it.
And I think that is a skill set and a mindset that definitely comes from the Marine Corps.
I learned a lot in the Marine Corps. Absolutely. Self-confidence. Take the word can't out of your vocabulary. Those are two super important things. And yeah, if I'm scared of it, then I got to do it. That came from what I consider one of my biggest failures in my life.
Last question. Favorite meal?
Oh, there's a guy that makes lasagna in Kauai. He's a lasagna. It's like 12 layers. And it is the most impressive food, not just lasagna. It's the most impressive food I've ever eaten.
Excellent. Brian, I appreciate you doing this and being our first guest.
Absolutely, Harry. Thank you very much for giving me the honor of being your first guest.
Excellent.
I hope I didn't disappoint.
Not at all. Not at all. I appreciate your time. Thank you for tuning in. Links for today's guest can be found in the show notes. Don't forget to like and subscribe to our podcast on Spotify and Apple Podcasts to stay up to date on our latest episodes. You can also follow us on Instagram check out our YouTube channel, and visit our website at morethanthegun.com for more content. Stay tuned for our upcoming episodes where together we'll explore the many layers of our profession and discover what truly makes it more than the gun. The views and opinions expressed in this podcast are those of the individuals involved and do not necessarily reflect the official policy or position of More Than the Gun or its host.